Okay, well, it's 5:30, so it's officially time to start. I'll say a few words and then we'll have Dr. Laura Kim Joyner speak on behalf of the scientific committee, and then I'll return for the main part of the presentation. Welcome, everyone. If you have not joined the official conference WhatsApp group, please do so as soon as you can. And if you haven't downloaded the official conference program, there's a QR code on the screen for that as well, or you can find it at psittacongress.org. You've also gotten this information in emails from the Congress website or from me or someone. First of all, it's important to say thank you to all of our host organizations, Loros Sin Fronteras, ProAlas, Macau Mountain, One Earth Conservation, Macau Society, ISEBIO, the Psittacine group at the Mesoamerican Society, SICOS, and of course the Parrot Release Network. So thanks to all of those organizations for promoting this work. And thank you to our sponsors who have provided the money needed to allow us to run this conference, to have a great web page, to have people helping facilitate, and to make the fee waivers a possibility. So thank you to all of those organizations. Thanks to the whole scientific committee that have been reviewing the abstracts and helping build the scientific program. And thanks so much to the organizing committee, without which this would have been an absolute nightmare. Paula, Silvia, Adam, Renato, Gabriela, and myself have been working hard to get this all up and running. The conference program got a lot of information. It's about 120 pages. It has the full schedule. It has abstracts for all the presentations. It has information on how to participate in the poster session. So download it now, either get it off the website or grab that QR code before it goes away. So today we had 4 wonderful workshops that were well attended and really great. I'm sorry if you missed one that you were hoping to see. And then tomorrow and Saturday, we go into the main body of the conference. We'll have a plenary sessions, oral and poster presentations tomorrow, and then a mixture of plenary and oral presentations on Saturday. And the conference will end on Sunday with a set of 6 different roundtable discussions that you can pick and choose as you would like. And with that, I would like to invite Laura Kim Joyner to say some opening words about the conference.
Thanks, Don. That's great. Welcome everybody. I'm only one of the very, very many who work so hard on this conference. So it's really a privilege to be able to be here now and to greet you all and to welcome you all. Thank you, all of you all, for being a part of this conference, whether you're speaking, organizing, Zoom room teching, whatever you're doing, teaching. We can all contribute to the conference, and it's important that we do. It's important that all of us are here, because I'm just going to say the words, we need to grow our social capital. What is that? Social capital is just the number of people and linkages we make. But it isn't just the number, it's how good we are at it. It's about intrapersonal and interpersonal relationships. Studies have shown in conservation that one of the main reasons why conservation projects fail is not because of lack of money or because of poaching or any of the economics. It's because of our interpersonal and interpersonal relationships. So we want our conservation, our research, our organizational projects to do really, really great and to work. And so we need to work on building social capital. And well, how do we do that? Well, we just listen to each other. We support during the conference. We support each other's work and dreams. We be curious. We be grateful for each other and all the great work people are doing with parrots all over the world. We find ways to inspire and motivate each other. We can mentor our younger and our newer people here. And of course, we can just network in the chat during questions and answers after the conference. We can organize and find new ways to work together, such as what happened back in, I think it was in 2019, at the Mesoamerican Society for Biology and Conservation in Guatemala. we went to hear all the presentations, but there was a lot of conversation outside and around all these presentations. And we decided, different countries, different people from many different places. We were tired of the poaching and the trafficking and the demand for parrots. So out of that energy, L'Oreal Sin Fronteras was born. We came together to make a difference across differences, which Don has especially done, and his very, very extensive team, helping us make a difference across differences. And Don, I think you have a lot more to say about that, so I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Laura Kim, and thanks to all the members of the scientific committee and the organizers for their work to get us to where we are now, to launch the hopefully first International Psittacine Congress, the virtual 2025. So today, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what I'll call a diversity of parrots from a diversity of perspectives. So the objectives of this Congress are to bring together participants from around the world to exchange knowledge and share innovative techniques. And as Laura Kim alluded to build connections among the participants. And if we look at the presentations about where the work was done on the parrots that'll be talked about during this conference, we actually have 6 continents represented across 20 nations with 13 countries in the Americas. I'd like to point out 2 countries in particular, Mexico and Brazil. Arriba Mexico with 15 presentations on Mexican parrots being 15 of the approximately 60 that were scored here. And Brazil, just 1 presentation behind, also clearly put together. These are about half of the presentations, showing that these 2 nations really are leaders globally in the study and conservation of parrots. So congratulations to those. But also special thanks to those of you who may not be here because of time differences, but thank you anyhow, those from Africa, Asia, Australia, and Europe. Our organizations are very heavily based in the New World, with 13 countries in the Americas being represented. But it's really important also to bring in these other areas. And hopefully at some point we can find ways to better include. Perhaps we'll just do a conference that runs 24 hours and everyone can come in their time zones. I hope I'm kidding. As far as attendees, I pulled together when we had about 260 people registered. We have all the continent, well, not Antarctica, no penguins here, but 34 nations, including 18 nations in the Americas, again, led nations of residence being Mexico, Brazil, and the United States leading it off. So very similar to our presentations, except a few extra people based in the United States. As far as our language breakdown, as you've seen in our workshops today, we have a nice mix of languages. We have English and Spanish leading the charge, Spanish a little bit more than English, and then with a little bit of Portuguese thrown in for fun. We haven't heard any Portuguese yet, but we know you're there, and we're looking forward to working on our Portuguese as we go through. But what does this mean? And now if we go back to Laura Kim's ideas about listening to people and building social capital and being nice to each other, we really need to be patient. We need to work hard to understand, and we need, if we're presenting, especially if you're Argentinian, sorry, we need to speak slowly. We need to be conscious that others speak different languages, and our Zoom captions are great, but they don't always, and they go fast, especially when your speaker's speaking fast. So remember, be patient, work hard to understand, and work hard to be understood. I mentioned parrot diversity. We do have a good amount of parrot diversity in this conference as well. The family Psittacidae with 52 presentations on New World parrots and 1 on Old World, and then a smattering of cacatuids, psittaculids, but no Strigopidae joining us. And when we look across the genera, you can see we are heavily biased towards Ara. And also we need to realize that there are lots of groups that are missing. So it suggests that there are a lot more species out there that this group at least is not working on. So there's a lot more to be done, a lot of places into which we can expand. And when we add up all the macaws, there's quite a few things that in English are considered macaws. But then when I reflected on that, if we look at the logos from our sponsors and our host organizations, I think it also reflects this incredible bias towards macaws with all of these organizations. And I forgot to put the conference logo on this page, which also prominently features a scarlet macaw. So our presentations represent reflecting our logos. So one of the things I was thinking about is why should we host a congress about Psittacine? Why shouldn't we just do an ornithological conference or perhaps just a conservation congress? Would it bring together the same people? Would it have that same type of energy? And what I realized was parrots in so many ways are unique. They're unique because they're unique, and there are many more reasons than what I've listed here, but they're unique physically and biologically, from a zygodactyl feet and a strong hooked beak to how they learn to behave when they're young, which means they may learn to talk and ask for a cracker, or they may learn to fly free in the wild and avoid predators. They're also hard to study. They need specialized techniques. We need specialized techniques to study them because a lot of the ornithological techniques don't really work. You don't just put up mist nets in the understory to study parrots. Point counts are very problematic. And even just the nest surveys that have formed the basis for so much work in North America and Europe aren't the same and are much more difficult to deal with. Parrots in and of themselves are also a very valuable tourism resource. Clay licks, like in southeastern Peru, breeding and roosting areas, Buraca das Araras in Brazil, or the breeding areas of the hyacinth macaws, and especially where you have large species like macaws, perhaps cockatoos as well, these become extremely valuable, as you can see from some of these tourist tour ideas that I picked up off of Brazil, Peru, and Costa Rica. Parrots have also live mostly in what's referred to as the global south. So traditionally, they've been studied much less than the species in Europe and North America. Very many strong universities developed in Europe and North America, and that's where ornithology was born for the most part, and that's where we learned about what birds are. However, parrots don't fit that very well. And when I was beginning my career, there were very few people who were studying parrots, and this made it even more difficult. But there was a large contradiction in this, because even when I began in the early 90s, you could show a picture of a parrot to almost anyone in the world, and they would say, yes, I recognize that. That's a parrot. However, historically, they've been very poorly known in the wild. So you could say, yes, that's a parrot. But if you asked, where does it nest? How many young does it raise? Do they starve in the nest? What do they eat? All of those questions remained unknown, which makes it kind of contradictory. Parrots, I would also posit, face a uniquely wide range of threats. And as a result of this, about 25% of all parrot species, over 400 of them, are either extinct in the wild, critically endangered, or vulnerable. So 26% are considered threatened. Like most species on the planet, they're threatened by habitat loss and degradation. However, they also have this extra, we heard about in some of the presentations this morning. They're hunted. They're killed for food and feathers, and they're captured for the illegal trade. And this illegal trade is an extremely complex socioeconomic issue with many conservation implications that ripple throughout everything we do. All of us that are here are addressing issues that are knock-ons from the trade very often. And we have to accept the reality that parrots have been kept as pets globally for millennia. That's not saying that it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's totally neutral statement. It's a fact. They've been kept for millennia since um, in the pre-Columbian Americas, they were brought back by Alexander the Great to Europe, a very long history. And we also have to look at this very strong reality of right now. IUCN recommends reintroduction or ex situ work for 57 species of parrots. So what that means is, even from a purely conservation perspective, there are likely to be parrots in cages moving forward. Again, I'm not in favor or against. I'm laying out the reality in which we are all working. And the parrot trade has had many impacts on parrots and their populations. It's greatly endangered many species, eliminating them from suitable habitats, as we saw with the Amazona oratrix in Tiberio's work. It's also caused overcrowding and welfare problems for birds in captivity. That can be from places in the United States to rescue centers in Latin America and beyond. It's also created a large captive population of parrots that provide opportunities for research, for reintroduction, for releases, for um, and interactions with captive parrots have given some people a strong attachment to parrots. And because of interactions with captive parrots, some of the people in this Congress have dedicated their lives to the conservation of parrots. Again, these are realities. I'm not trying to put moral judgments on this. These are just realities that we're facing in the work we're doing as Psittacine conservationists. And as a result, parrots have this unique community of stakeholders. There are dedicated conservation NGOs that really work mostly with parrots. Loro Sin Fronteras, as was just mentioned before, that's a parrot-specific organization. And many of the other ones, the Macaw Society, the Parrot Release Network, all of these are dedicated conservation NGOs that are working specifically with parrots. We have scientists who've dedicated their careers, like myself, to the study of parrots. There are aviculturists, there are specialized veterinarians, and there are members of the public that are here that consider themselves parrot lovers or parrot aficionados. So what we end up with, and why we have a Psittacine Congress, is this unique group of birds and unique group of people deserve their own Congress. And I would posit that that is why we have the International Psittacine Congress that we are opening right now. If you've looked at the schedule, and I hope you have, because it was so much work to put it together, this conference will cover so many different themes. We have genetics, we have wildlife management, we have reintroduction, we have urban ecology, reproductive ecology, assisted reproduction, movements and conservation, community conservation, behavior. And that's a mess. It's a lot of different information. And how can we process all of this information that we're going to get over the coming 3 days? Well, I'd like to break it down into 3 different types of presentations to help you kind of think about the conference and the information you're getting from a broader perspective. We start with basic science. This is research on how the world works. We have natural history studies, we have experiments on behavior, a variety of things like that. But we also have what is called applied science, research to address real world problems, developing new techniques, trying out new methods of conservation, and trying to make conservation work better. And then we have conservation case studies. These are reports given by organizations about real world conservation and the results they've had. So let's look at each in a little more detail. With basic science, the main objective is to do research, understand how the world works. It may not be driven by specific conservation problems. It may be, it's often experimental with controls and treatments, or it might be observational natural history studies. This is often done by students and researchers at universities as they get a better handle on how the world works, how basic natural history of parrots or experiments on how they behave, etc. And then we move to the applied science. Again, in applied science, the main goal is to do research. But in this case, it's studying real world problems, problems that are being faced, in our case, conservation problems being faced by parrots. Often these develop or test new conservation techniques that are then published so that all of us, the parrot conservation community, can access those works and use that information to help parrot population. This is often done by researchers, but now a lot of this research is done in conjunction with conservation organizations, either done with them or is inspired by the work of some of the problems faced by conservation organizations. And really, when you boil down applied research, the goal is to help conservation work better. And now we get to our third class of presentation. The conservation case studies. And here, the whole reason, the driving force behind this work is flipped over. This is where someone goes out and does conservation and then realizes, I need to report back on this because I've found exciting things. But what drove it was to do actual conservation. It's normally not set up as an experiment. If you're trying to save the scarlet macaw in Chiapas, Mexico, you're not necessarily going to set up controls and treatments. You're going to do the very best you can and try and get it out there. And this type of research may or may not involve professional researchers. Instead, it's mostly done by conservation organizations that may have researchers working with them or may not. And unfortunately, extremely unfortunately, rarely these types of studies are published because it just takes so much time and effort to actually create the scientific publications that will go forward. But these case studies are super valuable to learn about current conservation problems. And honestly, the best place to find this information is to come to a conference like this, where our professionals, our conservation professionals, are here sharing their experiences with us. So to summarize, we have three different types of presentations that are being done. So which one's better? And I know at my university, they are all scored differently, but for the sake of parrot conservation, they are all different and super valuable. And that's an important thing to remember. And the really interesting thing is how these three can fit together. Basic science, understanding how the world works, can really help us understand the basis for the problems we're facing in applied science. And the outcomes from our applied science, something may happen that we don't understand, and we may have to go back to do basic scientific studies to understand what's happening in the conservation problems we're facing. And then this applied science can be used by conservation organizations in the field to actually do better conservation. And the successes and failures of the conservation organizations will help drive the next round of applied science that's needed to help improve our conservation. So now I would like to take those three different types of science and talk to you about some real-world examples. This is work done with Dr. Gabriela Vigo-Trauco on macaw chick starvation. In southeastern Peru, Gabby and my team were working on macaw chick mortality. Why do macaw chicks die? Very simple, basic study, trying to understand what was happening in the nests of scarlet macaws. But at the same time, WWF in Guatemala was actually using cross-fostering. They were taking chicks that were likely to die and moving them around among nests. So we worked together to create an applied science project where we looked at the cross-fostering experiments and cross-fostered about 28 scarlet macaws and intensely studied the outcome of what happened, why it happened, and how it happened. And now I can happily say that we have an open source publication on increasing survival of wild scarlet macaw chicks using foster parents. And that, because it's open, any organization can use it to help outcomes and improve the conservation of parrots like scarlet macaw. What about genetics and parrot release? Well, for many years, people like my colleague George Ola and others have been working on parrot genetic diversity just understanding the genetic diversity of parrots and the implications of that. Very nice basic science. However, recently, governments have been picking up on this, and now there are multiple governments that want genetic analysis of parrots before they're released into the wild. The problem there is there's a big disconnect between enjoying studying parrot genetic diversity and making it a legal requirement before a bird's released. And this has really spawned an entire cottage industry of applied science projects where parrot genetics are being mapped at a landscape scale so that when a bird is recovered from the pet trade, the illegal trade, it can be mapped as to where it came from so that bird can be sent back to that area with the possibility of being released back into the wild. So again, a different direction of how conservation action, basic science, and applied science have all been fitting together. And now I'd like to go a little deeper into this one, where parrot rehabilitation and release as a conservation action. I've gone out into the real world recently, and I have interacted with a large number of people who work specifically in the field of parrot rehabilitation and release. It's been about 2 to 3 years that I've had this focus. And the conclusion I've come to, and why I even talk about parrot rehabilitation and release as a conservation action, is this. This is the logic that's behind that idea. Authorities, when they go out and enforce the laws, the wildlife trade laws, they will often confiscate animals. In this case, very often parrots. Those authorities then need to do something with those live birds that they've confiscated, and very often they pass them to rehabilitation centers. And many of those rehabilitation centers have the objective of releasing those animals back to the wild. However, if rescue centers do not release animals, they may be prohibited by governments. They may not have the funding or the expertise, or they can't get the permits, or for whatever reason, those rescue centers are not releasing animals. It's finite. They will fill to capacity. If the rescue centers are full, they can't accept more animals, because at that point, if they accept more animals, they may drive themselves into bankruptcy, or reduce the animal welfare to such a state where it's worse. It's just not acceptable. And if they don't accept animals, the authorities cannot pass them off. And if authorities can't place animals, I have heard from people in multiple countries that if they can't place animals, they may not enforce the laws and confiscate animals. And in the absence of confiscating animals and enforcing the wildlife trade laws, wildlife trade is likely to go unpunished, continue, or potentially even expand. So in this method, in this reason, I see that parrot release is actually an important part of parrot conservation. And I know that there are people in the audience right now who may not agree with me, but that is the logic that I have come to. Okay, but let's go back for a reality check. Releasing of confiscated parrots faces many challenges. First of all, and the big traditional one, is they may be a disease risk. The parrot releases also need the support of local people. Raising the young chicks can actually be challenging. It may be difficult to keep them alive. Many of these birds that come out of the illegal trade lack fear of humans. They may also lack basic flight skills, the social skills needed to survive as a parrot, and many of them lack the advanced survival skills of flocking, landscape navigation, and predator avoidance. So if you're a group, be it a government, and I've talked to governments about this, and I've talked to conservation organizations, what do you do? Where do you go with practical guidance as to what to do with animals that have been confiscated from the illegal trade? Well, that's a good question. A lot of academics have not addressed the core issue, the big question of what should we do with confiscated parrots. Very few publications discuss this. The Parrot Action Plan, which was published in 2000, is one of the ones that addresses it the most clearly. And they say, well, you can donate them. Well, if you donate them, the places you donate them to are likely to fill up. Or you can sell them. So tell people it's illegal to sell parrots and then get them all and sell them. Doesn't work. Yeah, the optics there don't work very well. Or you can euthanize them. And often this is presented as the best option. Or you can release them, but Snyder et al. Present this as the worst option. Euthanizing them means they don't go back into the wild and they're not a threat. Releasing them has a lot of potential threats. So maybe we should look at IUCN and CITES. And when we look at the guidelines they have for what to do with confiscated parrots, I love it because they actually say guidelines for disposal of confiscated parrots. Disposal is a very interesting word. It's very laden with extra meanings. So what do they say? Well, they say release. They immediately point out the problems with release, disease issues, genetic contamination, behavioral contamination, etc. But they come to the conclusion that if you're dealing with a species that's of conservation concern that's threatened, then yes, it's probably a good idea to consider release. However, for common species, the answer really is no, they probably shouldn't be released. They say they can be kept in captivity. But then they also say in a nation like Brazil or Colombia or Mexico, where thousands of parrots are being confiscated, it's just not viable to keep them all in captivity. So they go back to euthanasia and they say euthanasia is the safest for wild populations. However, in these regulations, they recognize it's not always legal. In some countries, it may not be legal to kill these birds. It's never popular. The people who receive these birds don't want to do it. The citizens of the nations don't want it to happen. And it really sends a mixed message. That mixed message being, oh, these parrots are so valuable. We need to conserve them. You can't have them as pets. Boom, we're going to kill them. And that mixed message just becomes very difficult to deal with. So, and I will mention that the IUC guidelines, release guidelines, are detailed, they're complex, and they really don't address a lot of the key issues. And in many cases, the organizations I've worked with say that what's provided in the IUCN guidelines are so difficult, and the governments are trying to hold them to such high standards that it shuts down the entire system. And when we step back and we look at the reality of what's happening in many of these countries, and I know Latin America the best, thousands of parrots are being confiscated every year. Many of these organizations and sometimes even nations have a lack of disease testing capacity. The organizations have very limited budgets, and they are faced with having to feed and house thousands and thousands of parrots, and immediate action is needed. You can't just delay for months and months on end. So as kind of a bottom line, if you look to the academics and the international guidelines, there really is very little guidance as to what to do with these. And euthanasia is often just put forward as the best option. So if an organization or a government isn't willing to do mass euthanasia of healthy parrots, what should be done? And I feel very odd personally as an academic when I look back and I realize scientists, the people whose job it is to sit around and think, really haven't put much effort into trying to figure out, okay, what's a good way to mitigate these risks and find some practical solutions. So as a result, my collaborators and I are studying parrot rehabilitation and release as a conservation tool. We have applied science studies. We're looking at pre-release training in 2 different cases. I think my name is on oral presentations being given by others as part of these collaborations. There's a study I'm collaborating with the University of Cincinnati, social behavior of monk parakeets, which again is trying to understand the basic science that may feed into the success of releases. And my group has also started the Parrot Release Network, an outreach organization designed to help connect conservation action with applied research in order to improve the field of parrot releases, both from confiscated animals and those bred in captivity. So why did I go into all of this? Well, I want you to see this as an example of a research program that's mixing basic and applied science that's being driven by real-world conservation projects. My hope, of course, is that you will emulate this at some level, where whether you do conservation, a reminder to look for the applied science. If you do basic science, to think about how it applies to applied science, and how to connect these three types of work. And now I'll transition just a little bit to talk about the people that are going to be at this Congress with us. Who's surrounding you? Well, it says 200 people registered, but that's not true. I think we've broken 250, thanks to all you late registries. And we have experienced professionals, and I guess I would count myself among those, the past and present leaders in the world of parrot conservation. We also have young professionals, the rising stars that we're starting to see and that we'll be hearing from over the coming years, over the coming 2 days of presentations. We have students, the leaders of tomorrow. And I know we also have local people who may be stepping on the international stage for the first time to share their conservation experiences. If we look at the percents of totals of people who have registered for the conference, about 40% of you self-identify as conservation practitioners, professionals working in the field of conservation, with only 30% of you identifying as researchers, which is perfect because that interface of applied conservation science, of applied science, is the mixture of researchers and conservation practitioners. So we have very fertile ground for new studies like that. 30% are students, 10% veterinarians, and about 5% is amateur parrot enthusiasts. And one thing to keep in mind is we all share a great interest in Psittacine conservation. We're here for the parrots. We're here because we have some interest and knowledge about these birds and are interested in helping conserve them. And I would say that this diversity is a major strength of this conference. Over my career, I've interacted with a broad diversity of people, sometimes as many as 50 at once in the field. And I'd like to share just a little bit of what I've learned from all of these people over the years. So a first thing to think about, from a pure science, basic and applied science perspective, my research would not have been possible without the help from specialists on many topics. Because my research, just thinking about the parrots, the macaws we've worked on in Peru, has involved issues of wildlife management, landscape movements, community relations, aviculture, nutrition, ecotourism, soil science, animal behavior, veterinary medicine, climate work, genetics, botany, geophagy, the consumption of soil. And just raise your hand out there if anybody considers themselves an expert in all of these fields. Okay, I didn't think so. But I'm not either. So the only way to do this type of work is to bring in those collaborators, find that expertise elsewhere. And as a researcher, this type of collaboration is vital. So as a researcher, reach out to other scientists. As a conservation practitioner, reach out to other practitioners and scientists to fill in the gaps of the expertise that you don't have. But my research has also been helped by a lot of other people that don't self-identify as scientists. Veterinarians, bird breeders, and parrot lovers, local people, conservation professionals, and students have all had different ways of influencing my research. I've learned about ecotourism, rescue and release, nest box use, diet and nutrition, all of these from different types of professionals that I've had the pleasure to work with. What have I learned from veterinarians? How to handle parrots, physical skills, how to collect swabs and blood. Very important. Before I worked with veterinarians, I was not afraid, but incapable of doing much with parrots in the hand. Talked about and learned about disease testing, even have some publications on that, and the problems with the parrot trade. Bird breeders and parrot lovers, a group that doesn't necessarily get a lot of play within the conservation community, However, I've learned a great deal about parrot husbandry. I've learned about chick hand feeding and care, and it also connected people with great hand feeding knowledge to conservation projects in Mexico and Peru and other sites as well. I've learned about free flight training, ways to prepare birds for release. And I've also learned about the human animal bond, which is something that's very important when thinking about how people are interacting with parrots, why they're interacting with parrots, etc. Regardless of what your opinions are, it's important to understand. What have I learned from local people, from comuneros, from campesinos? I actually learned tree climbing techniques. I learned about where and when parrots nest. And probably most importantly, I learned how to see their world. And sometimes I just get a glimpse of it if I'm only there briefly. And other times, as time goes on, I get to see much more deeply. But always understanding how people see their world can be vital if you're trying to conserve portions of their world. I've also learned from students. I've learned how to ask new questions, but more importantly, I've seen whole new ways of seeing my own research systems. A student brought me a manuscript and about clay lakes, and I read it and I was like, no, this is totally wrong. And sure enough, over the weeks to months, I realized, wow, I totally didn't get it. And it was his work that was correct, not my my previous ideas. So I think the message I'm trying to give you all today is that everyone at this conference is valuable. Everyone has their own unique perspectives. Everyone has different knowledge. And that is extremely valuable. So I would say, I know for a fact that many of us see the world differently, and we don't all agree on some of the key issues. But if we put aside what our ideas and our thoughts and open our minds to listen to each other, we can learn a great deal from the people with different perspectives. So, with all of that information, internalizing all of that information, it's time to make a plan to get the most out of the Congress. And I would suggest you go and see talks that you know nothing about. Find a topic and say, wow, I don't know about that. What can I learn? Find out about the host organizations. I know in one of the workshops today, there's like, how do I get involved? Well, in the program, every logo of every organization has an embedded link. Click on it, and you go right to their website. Ask questions to the speakers. Go deeper. And message people to introduce yourself. Use Zoom or use our conference WhatsApp and exchange information, talk with them privately. Build your professional networks. If you're old like me, you may be rekindling relationships with people you haven't seen in a long time. If you're a young professional or a student, this is a time to start to make new connections. I would say set yourself goals. Who can you meet? Who in this list of people, of presenters, etc., do you want to introduce yourself to? And then do it. What can you learn? What topics don't you know about that you should learn about? What can you learn? And then how, as you leave the conference, how can you use your knowledge to better help parrots? And of course, the most important, enjoy the International Psittacine Congress 2025. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a huge amount of work to get to today. Just preparing this talk, but also everything else that has gone before it. I'm looking forward to interacting with all of you and hearing all of these presentations over the coming 3 days. Thank you so much for your time and for being here. Here are some of the links, and I would be happy to take any questions if you like.